Hello, my name is Chloe McDonald. I'm an attorney at Harder, Seacrest, and Emery, and I am recording this training on preventing discrimination and harassment in the workplace, which is a training that many of your colleagues received on November 13th. So why are we here? Why do we have to do this training? We are here because New York State mandates it. New York State actually requires sexual harassment training on a yearly basis. And so if you think, geez, I've had a lot of training on this, it's because you have, right? It's because it's legally mandated. It's also a good idea. When we learn about this topic, it brings it to the forefront of our mind. It puts us on our best behavior. Today's training will provide an overview of the laws regarding discrimination and harassment. We'll discuss your rights and responsibilities as employees and supervisors. Hopefully, this training will answer any questions you may have. But if it doesn't, or you have other questions, you should reach out to school leadership, human resources, and talk to them about it. Feel free to pause the training and do that, or follow up with them after the training. They welcome those questions. Why is this important? When we train on this, it helps ensure a safe and productive workplace. And this is an issue that impacts not only employers, but also individuals. By doing this training, we're going to minimize legal risk across the board, right? Legal risk for the school and employment risk for individuals. In New York State, individuals can be personally liable for claims of workplace discrimination and harassment. And in my practice, I'm seeing that more and more. I'm seeing more individuals listed on the caption for complaints. And that's a really scary thing to think about, right? If you're named individually in a lawsuit. And so that's a good reason to pay attention to this training and make sure that you're complying with all of the laws and, of course, your employer's policies. Lavelle has policies that prohibit discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. You received a copy of those along with the training materials. The policies contain information on your rights and responsibilities, ways to report complaints, including a complaint form, and also investigation procedures. The basics. Let's start with the basics. Always a good place to start. Federal, New York State, and local laws, the New York City Human Rights Law, offer protection from discrimination on the basis of many protected characteristics, including sex, but also race, religion, gender identity or expression, sexual orientation, transgender status, national origin, age, disability, domestic violence status, marital status, genetic history, veteran status, criminal conviction status, and more. Harassment is a form of illegal discrimination under all of those local, state, and federal laws. Today's training is going to focus on sexual harassment. So what is that? Well, it's a form of sex discrimination. Of course, it's unlawful. And it includes harassment not only on the basis of sex, but also sexual orientation, self-identified or perceived sex, gender identity, gender expression, status of being transgender. Those all fall under the umbrella of sex and sexual harassment. We've used some terms, and I want to make sure that we all understand the definitions. Biological sex. When people are born, they're defined by their reproductive organs and later their sexual characteristics. That is somebody's biological sex. Gender can refer to the role society assigns to a person based on their sex, but it can also refer to an individual's concept of themselves. Gender is not a binary concept and can include a range of identities, all of which are protected. Sexuality is who you are attracted to, your sexual orientation. Harassment is a form of discrimination. It's prohibited by many laws, as I mentioned before, and your employer's policy is the list of the laws. Title VII is a federal law, the state human rights law, and the city human rights law. So what is sexual harassment? It includes unwelcome conduct, either of a sexual nature or that is directed at an individual because of their sex, when the conduct has the effect of unreasonably interfering with their work performance, creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive work environment. You don't want to come to work because you're being subject to offensive comments. There maybe your supervisor has shown you something inappropriate and now you feel very uncomfortable with them. And you just feel icky in the work environment. You dread going to work and having to deal with this conduct. It's an example. It also could be when conduct is made to be either explicitly or implicitly a term or condition of employment. What do we mean by that? Well, let's say you take lunch at 1 p.m. and that supervisor keeps showing you weird pictures or saying how great you look in leggings or something odd. And you think, you know what? I don't want to take lunch at 1 p.m. anymore because I don't want to deal with them. I'm going to take lunch at 11, right? You've changed your day. You've rearranged your work in response to this unwelcome conduct, right? That's conduct that has become a condition of your employment. It also can occur when either submitting to conduct or rejecting conduct is used as the basis for employment decisions. If you don't go on a date with me, I'm not going to give you that raise, right? That's a form of sexual harassment. There are many behaviors in the workplace that can constitute sexual harassment. To boil it down, most simply, it falls into 3 buckets. The first bucket is actions. Actions can create sexual harassment. So that could be making sexual gestures, catcalling somebody, elevator eyes, kind of giving them the up and down look over. It could be something as serious as assault, right? In which case we may also want to involve law enforcement. It could be groping. It also could be just that person who always is bumping into you and you're like, why is this person constantly touching me, right? It makes you feel uncomfortable. That could be potentially sexual harassment. It could include words, an inappropriate comment, something that's lewd, something that's crude, a joke that touches on sex. It could be name calling somebody a degrading name, calling somebody a pet name that's of a sexual nature. It also could be visual. The stereotypical example was somebody hanging up a swimsuit calendar in their office, and people feel uncomfortable having to see that all the time. We don't have hard copy calendars so much anymore, so it could be something that's on your phone screen, right? Maybe your coworker's lock screen is somebody in a bikini and you see that all the time and you're like, geez, that's making me feel uncomfortable. Could be somebody showing you a video or a meme or a TikTok. Those can be examples of sexual harassment. It also could be sex stereotyping. That's when you treat somebody or you assume somebody is going to act or be a certain way or take a certain job because of their sex, right? Well, of course, my nurse is going to be a female, or yes, definitely my mechanic will be a male, right? Sex stereotyping can be a form of sexual harassment when we base employment decisions around it. That would be inappropriate. Sexual harassment is no joking matter. What you think is funny may not be funny to somebody else, right? The Netflix comedy special we watched, maybe it's got great reviews. Maybe the majority of people like it, right? But if that comedian is joking about protected characteristics, such as sex, we're not going to bring those jokes into the workplace. What's okay at home or outside of work is not necessarily appropriate for work. Subjects related to protected characteristics are just off limits. We also don't want to joke about sexual matters. If we allow jokes and inappropriate comments to go unchecked, that can create an unacceptable norm, a snowball effect, right? One comment's made, nobody says anything, so then more comments start being made. Nobody wants to be in that situation. It's perfectly acceptable to say to somebody who's made a comment that makes you feel uncomfortable, hey, I really don't appreciate that. I don't think that kind of joke is funny. I'd appreciate if you would just not share those types of jokes with me anymore. And it can be a very quick conversation. Usually it really goes a long way in keeping that person in check and helping them realign what they think is okay in the workplace or not. And it stops that snowball from rolling down the mountain. There are two types of sexual harassment. The first is quid pro quo sexual harassment, and this happens when there is a person in authority and that person either tries to trade job benefits or says that they will withhold job benefits depending on a response to a request for a sexual favor. The example of, if you want that promotion, you have to go out to dinner with me. That can be a form of quid pro quo sexual harassment. Quid pro quo sexual harassment is unique to sexual harassment. It's not a type of harassment that's found for other protected characteristics, and it requires that the person who is, trying to give away or take away job benefits actually have the authority to do so. The other type of sexual harassment is a hostile work environment. And we've got quid pro quo, which is a very specific type of sexual harassment, and hostile work environment is everything else. It's hostile actions that are taken against an individual because of that person's sex. Could be any of those examples we just discussed a few slides ago. Now, under the federal law, conduct has to be severe or pervasive. It's a standard under Title VII, but New York State has done away with that standard, and they've replaced it with petty slights or trivial inconveniences as far as the burden that a plaintiff or a claimant would have to meet for the claim to be actionable under the law. So now in New York, we're trying to figure out on a case-by-case basis whether the conduct rises above what a reasonable person would consider as a petty slight or a trivial inconvenience, right? For a hostile work environment, the person who was the recipient of the conduct could be the person the joke was said to, could be somebody who overheard the joke in the workplace, whether that person is subjectively offended by whatever happened. And then we need to figure out if a reasonable person would agree with them. And we're going to use a standard to help us do that. Because the petty slights and trivial inconvenience standard is fairly new in New York, we are still watching it be redefined by case law and jury verdicts. Bottom line, courts will consider the totality of the circumstances. A single comment made in circumstances where the comment would, for example, signal views about the roles of a protected class in the workplace, that single comment may be considered more than a petty slight or trivial inconvenience. Again, it's going to depend on the circumstances. Comments that objectify bodies or are sexually ridiculing someone, even if isolated, could be more than a petty slight or trivial inconvenience. Continuing comments, right? Repeated comments that occur over time could be a form of sexual harassment and could rise above that petty slight or trivial inconvenience standard. We've made it to our first scenario. Karen and Jim are coworkers who start dating. Yes, all my scenarios will use office character names. After a few months, Jim starts distancing himself from Karen and eventually breaks things off with her. Around the same time, Karen learns that Jim has also been seeing Pam, who's one of their coworkers. Karen convinces Pam and Jim separately to meet her for coffee. It's a setup, and she confronts them both when they arrive. Jim admits he was casually seeing both women, and Karen responds by punching him. Pam breaks things off with Jim. She does not need the drama, and she tells Karen to go back to her brothel. Karen responds by pulling out a clump of Pam's hair. Messy. After this confrontation, Karen continues to pursue Jim. She has not had enough of him and keeps sending him texts and emails. When he ignores her, she files a complaint with Human Resources claiming that Jim has sexually harassed her. Questions. Question 1, does Karen have a legitimate claim of sexual harassment? If so, against whom? Well, we know Karen filed a complaint against Jim, but it doesn't seem like Jim's done anything here, right? He was involved in a consensual relationship with Karen. That doesn't appear to be a problem. And now he just doesn't want to be in that relationship with her anymore. And that's not a form of sexual harassment. So Karen does not have a legitimate claim against Jim. Pam did make one comment to Karen that's concerning. She told Karen to go back to her brothel. Of course, this was made under circumstances where she had been set up and Karen had punched Jim and then Karen attacked Pam, and what a mess. And so totality of the circumstances, is Pam going to be found to be a bad actor here? I'm not sure, but is that comment about a brothel appropriate? Absolutely not. Now, does anyone else have a potential sexual harassment claim? Well, Jim is now being subjected to repeat pursuits by Karen over and over and over again. And Karen filed a false claim against him. So now Jim could have a sexual harassment claim against Karen. Pam was assaulted by Karen related to a romantic relationship. That could be sexual harassment. It also could just be straight up assault. Question 3, does it matter that some of this conduct occurred outside of work? Bottom line, no. This was a very messy scenario, and it's going to have an impact in the workplace. And when something impacts the workplace, it's something that the employer should look into and address. So who can be the target of sexual harassment? First, I just want to make clear that sexual harassment can occur between any individuals regardless of their sex or gender. So males can harass males, females can harass females, it can be any sort of mix up there. The law protects employees, of course, from being the target of sexual harassment, but it also protects anyone else in the workplace. That could be an independent contractor, that could be a vendor, an apprentice, a student teacher who's not employed by the school. So non-employees in the workplace are protected from being the target of sexual harassment. On the flip side of that, who can be the perpetrator of sexual harassment in the workplace? Again, anyone in the workplace. It can be a coworker, it can be a supervisor, right? It could be anyone of any level who's an employee. It also can be a non-employee. It could be a third-party vendor, delivery person, subcontractor, apprentice, etc. When sexual harassment occurs in the workplace, any number of people could be involved. Where can sexual harassment occur? It doesn't have to just be the workplace. It's really whenever and wherever employees are fulfilling work responsibilities. Could be an employer-sponsored event, a conference, a holiday party, things that occur offsite and during non-work hours or on social media. When an employer is assessing whether it's something they need to address, we just need to determine if there's an impact being felt in the workplace. If it's bleeding over into the workplace, then it very well is something that should be addressed at work. If I'm on Facebook at night and I write a really nasty post about my coworker and I call her a bunch of derogatory names and I post it and I'm friends with people at work and they see it, the next day, everyone's going to be talking about it. There's going to be some drama. It's going to be felt at work, and that's something the employer would want to look into. Our next scenario, Kelly works at Acme Inc. She receives regular supply deliveries from a vendor, and the delivery worker for the vendor is usually at the employer 2 to 3 days per week. One day, the delivery worker begins to make comments to Kelly when he sees her, including comments about her body and the clothing she's wearing. None of Kelly's coworkers, nor her supervisor, overhear these comments. Kelly tells the worker that the comments make her uncomfortable and tells him to stop, but he continues to make the same types of comments when he sees her. Kelly then tells her supervisor about this behavior. Is this sexual harassment? Yes, likely, depending on the substance of those comments. Based on the scenario, we know there are comments about her body and the clothing she wears. That seems to be inappropriate. Maybe it was harmless, at first. Radio was like, oh, I really like your outfit today. I don't think a comment like that is sexual harassment. But here we know that the comments were made repeatedly and Kelly asked the person to stop making the comments. So even if you think your comment is harmless, right? Hey, I really like your outfit. Maybe if you say that to someone every day, it starts to make them feel weird. So if somebody tells you to stop, just stop, right? Do you have to comment on their outfit? No, probably not. But this wasn't just about clothing, it was also about her body. And that's something that we shouldn't be commenting on our coworkers' bodies or anyone's bodies for that matter. If Kelly's employer does nothing, is it liable for the actions of someone who is not their employee? Yes, potentially. Like I just said, um, anyone can be the perpetrator of sexual harassment in the workplace, and the employer needs to take some steps to address it. Here, ideally, the employer would reach out to the vendor and say, listen, your employee is engaging in some bad behavior. Here's what's going on. What can we do to fix it? It may be that, the vendors needs to speak to their employee and correct the behavior on their end. Maybe the vendor takes that delivery worker and moves them out of that role so that they don't continue to come and see Kelly. Those are some steps that the employer could help initiate by reaching out to the vendor to talk about the issues that are being had with the delivery worker. In a different scenario, Kelly's supervisor does not report Kelly's complaint to HR and does nothing in response to Kelly's complaint. Is Acme still liable to her supervisor? Is Acme still liable if her supervisor did not tell anyone about her complaint? Yes. The employer could still be liable in this scenario. And very concerningly, the supervisor could be subject to individual liability. I mentioned that in one of the beginning slides. In this scenario where the supervisor does nothing, the supervisor could be held individually liable for failing to act. Changing the scenario up one more time. Now Kelly tells the employer about the delivery worker's behavior, and her employer goes ahead and tells the delivery worker's employer, right? Talks to the vendor manager. Does the vendor manager have a duty to address the delivery worker's behavior towards someone who isn't an employee of the vendor? Also, yes. The vendor needs to address their employee's behavior, take steps to fix it, maybe move them off the route, give them some more training, whatever it may be. They too could be potentially liable in this situation. Let's move on to retaliation and what that means. Retaliation occurs when an employee suffers an adverse action as a result of engaging in a protected activity. What is a protected activity? Well, it could be making a complaint about suspected harassment or discrimination. It could be providing information during an investigation into a harassment or discrimination complaint, or testifying in connection with that same type of complaint. It's very important to note that the adverse action has to be because of the protected activity, right? There has to be some sort of connection. That connection could be time, right? You complain about sexual harassment on Monday and you're terminated on Wednesday. That's going to look potentially pretty suspicious. But maybe there's not a close time period between the actions. We could also see retaliation through context clues. You complained that your supervisor was treating you differently because of your age, and maybe that supervisor got a talking to from HR. But since then, that supervisor has kept making comments to you like, well, I've got to be extra careful around Chloe. She's going to, make a stink over every little thing. And then you get a really poor review and then you're fired, but that's, 6 months later. And the supervisor is the one that gave you the bad review and made the decision to terminate you. That could be retaliation, even though they didn't happen super close in time, again, based on those context clues. What is not retaliation? A negative employment action is not retaliation just because it happens after you engage in a protected activity. You're still an employee, you're still subject to all of your employer's policies and work rules, and you need to abide by those. So even if I complain about my supervisor, that doesn't mean that I can show up late every day, or be rude to other employees or violate the uniform policy, right? If I do things that violate my employer's policies, I should expect to be disciplined for them Engaging in protected activity is not a get out of jail free card. Another scenario, Diane is the only female in her 16-person department and the oldest person by nearly 15 years. After a year, Diane starts reporting to a new VP, Sam, who finds her performance lacking and in need of improvement. Despite several conversations between Diane and Sam intended to help Diane improve, her performance still suffers, and she is issued a final warning. Diane goes to HR to complain that only that the new VP thinks her projects are poorly organized and efficient, and nobody else seems to. She does not mention her gender or her age. She also goes to some other management level employees outside of her department to ask how to better communicate with her boss, and complains that the management feedback she's getting isn't justified, and it's because she's the only woman in her group. She also tells the VPs and managers, from these other departments, that her coworkers love her, call her the group's grandma. She's terminated for poor performance soon after expressing her concerns. Her question here: did the employer retaliate against Diane by terminating her after she complained? Split that to the scenario so we can look at it while we chat about it. Well, it's not looking good here. We talk about that first complaint that Diane made. She goes to HR to complain that only the new VP thinks her projects are poorly organized and efficient. She doesn't mention her gender or age. That is not a protected complaint. That's just it's a complaint, but it's not a complaint of unlawful discrimination or harassment. So there couldn't be retaliation about that type of complaint. However, she goes on to complain to other management level employees that the feedback she's getting isn't justified, and it's because she's the only woman in her group. And that complaint, Diane has implicated a protected status, and so that complaint is a protected activity. We have temporal proximity. We know that she was terminated for poor performance soon after expressing her concerns. So that's something that could insinuate retaliation, but we would need to dig a little bit deeper here. There's been a long history of performance issues. If HR received that complaint, ideally they would look into it, right? They would vet the performance issues, make sure what was going on was appropriate based on the expectations for the job, and look into the complaint that Diane had before going through with the termination. Supervisor responsibilities. Supervisors are held to a high standard of behavior. They are required to report harassment that is reported to them or that they have observed, even if nobody's complained to them about it or they've been asked to maintain confidentiality. They are responsible for discrimination or harassment that they should have known about. They cannot stick their head in the sand and pretend that things in the workplace are not happening just because no one's complaining about them. They're also expected to model appropriate behavior in the workplace. As I mentioned before, supervisors must report any harassment that they observe or know about, even if no one's objecting to it. They should report it promptly so it can be addressed. If they fail to report, they can be subject to discipline. They can also be held individually liable under New York state law as an aider and abetter. If they fail to report alleged harassment, supervisors, just like anyone else in the workplace, are also prohibited from engaging in retaliation and will be disciplined if they do so. Scenario: Stanley works as a receptionist for Acme Inc.'s front office. He likes to wear jewelry and the occasional eyeliner and black nail polish. His boss, Michael, thinks it's weird and makes sarcastic comments to him, including referring to him as an office boy. Stanley wants to develop his career in the area of customer relations, and he sees an opening for an outside sales position where he'd get to interface with customers on a regular basis. Michael tells Stanley if he wants that kind of job, he had better look more normal. Stanley tells Daryl, a friend and a manager, that he does not feel he's going to get a fair shake at the promotion opportunity. But Stanley asks Daryl to keep their conversation private. There's already enough chatter, and he doesn't want Michael to get in trouble. He's afraid that Michael will retaliate against him. Question 1. Is Michael correct to tell Stanley that wearing jewelry is not appropriate for a customer service role? True or false? False. Stanley's choice to wear jewelry appears to only be an issue here because Michael thinks it's weird for him to do so as a man. And Michael's comments may constitute sex stereotyping, which could be a form of sexual harassment. Now, that doesn't mean employers can't have legitimate uniform or dress code policies, right? If you're in a manufacturing environment, the employer may have a very good reason for saying no jewelry, or maybe you're in a medical field and there's a no jewelry, no nail polish rule, right? Those things might be necessary in the workplace, and enforcing those policies across the board would not be a form of sexual harassment. But here, based on Michael's comments that it's weird and that Stanley has to look more normal, we can infer that it's not appropriate in this scenario. Is Stanley the target of harassment on the basis of his sex or sexual orientation? True or false? Well, we know that Michael has made some inappropriate comments to Stanley, telling him to look more normal, telling him that he thinks, things that he chooses to wear or how he chooses to express himself is weird, and refers to him as his office boy, which sounds degrading, right? It sounds derogatory, and that could be a form of harassment based on Stanley's sex. It could be some sex stereotyping, which could be a form of sexual harassment. And if Michael is making these comments because of inferences that he's made about Stanley's perceived sexual orientation, that too could be a form of sexual harassment. Question 3, what should Daryl do? Daryl is a friend, but also in a management level position. And so Daryl needs to tell somebody about the concerns that Stanley is having and about Michael's behavior towards Stanley. Even though Daryl was asked by Stanley to keep it confidential, he can't do so. He's obligated to report these concerns up the chain, probably to HR or leadership, to make sure that they've been addressed. So what should you do if you are harassed? You should tell somebody. If an employer doesn't know about something, it can't do anything to fix it. So you should notify someone, and you can make that complaint either verbally or in writing. You can use the complaint form that was provided with your materials today. You can talk to a supervisor or a manager or human resources. If you just complain about it to your rank and file coworker, that person's not obligated to share that information with HR, and it may never get brought up or be addressed. So make sure you report it to somebody in leadership who can take steps to address it. Again, it's unlawful for an employer to retaliate against you for making a good faith report of suspected sexual harassment or assisting in any investigation. There will be an investigation into complaints. And as part of the investigation, which will be held as soon as possible, things will be kept confidential to the extent that they can be, right? The employer may need to interview some witnesses, and employees may be required to cooperate as needed in the investigation. Investigations vary case to case. It depends on what the complaint is, how to best investigate it. It could be reviewing documents, emails, phone records. I mentioned, somebody makes a nasty Facebook post. Maybe an employer would want to look at that Facebook post. It can involve interviewing witnesses, talking to the person who complained, talking to the person who is accused, but also anyone else who may have witnessed whatever went down, right? We've had the Jim, Karen, and Pam scenario. If Karen's complaining about Jim, maybe Pam is also interviewed about whatever happened at that interaction between the three of them. While the investigation is pending, there may be some interim actions to address immediate concerns, right? Separating the two employees so they just, this behavior doesn't continue to occur while the employer is figuring things out. At the end of the investigation, the person who complained and the person who was accused will be notified of the final determination, and appropriate action will be taken. The employer will document the investigation and the response. It's very important for you to participate in these so that the employer can do a full investigation and really understand the facts that happened. You're protected from retaliation for participating in these investigations. So I invite you to be open and honest if you're ever asked to participate. Outside of working through your employer, you can also take your concerns to the courts, New York State Supreme Court, or administrative agencies, including the New York State Division of Human Rights, the EEOC, or because you are in New York City, the New York City Commission on Human Rights. And the information for those is included in the materials. The last thing I want to talk to you about is bystander intervention, which is a strategy to prevent bullying, sexual harassment, and assault. What is a bystander? A bystander is a person who is present when an event takes place, but isn't directly involved, right? So you've overheard a conversation or you see something happening in your vicinity. Bystander intervention describes a situation where that bystander steps in to change the outcome. Stepping in as a bystander may give the person who's being subjected to the harassing conduct a chance to get out of the situation and get to a safe place. Victims often feel alone, and when a bystander steps in, that can make them feel supported. There's a difference between employees generally and supervisors and managers. Whereas bystanders may step in to take action, managers and supervisors must take action when they observe or become aware of sexual harassment. As a bystander, what can you do? Well, first, never put your own safety at risk. Nobody is asking you to get into the middle of a physical altercation between two employees. But short of that, what are some other things you can do, right? You can create a distraction by changing the topic of conversation or just straight up asking that person if they want to leave. You can be very direct, or you can be more subtle about it. It depends on the situation. It depends on your preference. You could talk directly to the person who's been harassed, trying to keep the attention away from the alleged harasser. Ask that person questions like, who did you come here with? Would you like me to stay with you? Again, being very supportive of the target. You can enlist others to help intervene in the situation. And if it's serious enough, particularly if you believe a crime is being committed, right? There's been assault, somebody's stalking someone, etc., you can contact security or law enforcement. These are some resources for bystander intervention. RAIN is specifically targeted toward sexual assault and abuse, and is the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization. Hollaback is a global movement to end harassment by building safe and inclusive public spaces. And these are some good resources. In conclusion, you have rights as an employee to work in an environment that is free from unlawful discrimination and harassment, to be treated with respect and dignity, to have any questions, complaints, or concerns addressed by your employer, and to have any good faith complaint investigated and, if possible, resolved. You also have responsibility to follow Lavelle's policies and procedures, to promote a culture of respect and professionalism in the workplace, which includes reporting behaviors that are inappropriate or unwelcome in the workplace, to let somebody who is making you feel uncomfortable know that what they need to do to stop that behavior, right? To tell them this isn't appropriate for the workplace, or if you don't feel comfortable having that conversation directly, to again report that behavior up to leadership. On the flip side, if somebody reaches out to you and says, hey, what you're saying is really unwelcome to me. I don't feel good about it. You should stop that behavior. You may not agree with them, but is that really the hill you want to die on, right? Maybe we can just stop the behavior, stop the comments that we know are making our coworker uncomfortable. Anyone who engages in inappropriate behavior, including harassment, discrimination, or retaliation, will be disciplined up to and including termination. Again, if you have any questions following this training, I encourage you to talk to human resources and school leadership, who would be happy to address any of your concerns. So, thank you.